Okay, well, it falls on me to say hi to everybody. So hi to everybody. Welcome to the second webinar for the Elders Council for Social Entrepreneurs. The title of the discussion today is, who are you if not your organization? It's my job to introduce this session. After that, Chris will take over as chair. Then we have two speakers, Jim and Sheila. Then we'll have a discussion, questions and discussion. And then Andrea will sum up at the end. So there's plenty of option for questions. If you could put that in the chat function. And the one golden rule throughout is if you're not speaking, if you could put yourselves on mute in the meantime, that would be fantastic, and throughout. Andrea, Chris and myself started this organization because we were social entrepreneurs at a certain stage. We either transitioned or were transitioning, or we had challenges in our journey as social entrepreneurs. And we recognized that there was a space for social entrepreneurs, partly because social entrepreneurship had only been kind of established and recognized about 20 or 30 years ago. And so consequently, social entrepreneurs were reaching a certain age, and this issue was starting to emerge. And as you can see from the number of people joining, a lot of people are really interested in this space and want to talk about it. So we've set these webinars up so that we can have a discussion about it, learn from each other, support one another, etc. It's always interesting to me sometimes when you compare our sector with other sectors. So you compare us with the business sector. There's a lot written at business management schools about succession planning for businesses, about founder syndrome, but nothing really written about social entrepreneurs. And the business story is that, you know, people have an end game. They're going to sell the business. They're going to give it to their family or whatever. And it's not that they don't have emotion connected up with the business that they might have founded. Of course they do, but they do have an end game. Whereas social entrepreneurs, we didn't come into it for money. We didn't come in for necessarily give it to our family. We came in it because we wanted to create change, and a huge amount of emotional capital put into that. But then the issue comes about, okay, how do you move on? What's the challenge? Because you want to be committed to making sure that that organization continues. You want to be part of it. Added to the fact that over the past 20 years, individuals, all of us on this call, I suspect, have been recognized, and we have status in society, in the media. We're seen as leaders. And so leaving the organization or getting the organization into a space where it is sustainable actually is very challenging, not only for the organization, but for us personally. So this becomes a fascinating area. There's all sorts of sides to this. There's all sorts of views. And so these are my opening remarks, really, to begin the discussion. And we have two great speakers who are going to speak about their personal journey and their personal insights. And so now I'll hand over to Chris, who's going to chair this session, and then I'll come back on and have some discussion later. Chris, over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jim, indeed. And a very warm welcome to everybody on this webinar. It's really lovely to see you here today, and thank you very much for being with us. Just very, very brief introductions to our two speakers first. So Jim Fruchterman is the founder of Benitech, the technology for social good non-profit, which he led for nearly 30 years, stepping aside in 2018. And he's recently launched Tech Matters. I'm sure he'll talk more about that, a tech non-profit which helps create software for systems change efforts. And then after we've heard Jim, we're going to hear Sheela Patel. Sheela is the founder of Spark. That stands for the Society for the Promotion of Area Resource Centers, which started working with pavement dwellers, and which he set up in Mumbai in 1984. Subsequently, the partnership with National Slum Dwellers and two urban poor movements in climate change expanded to work in 9 Indian states in 65 cities. So there's real volume in this work. She's also one of the founders of Shack Dwellers International, SDI, and in 1992, an invitation to meet 80 Black township leaders from the 9 provinces of South Africa to envision habitat in post-apartheid South Africa led to the India-South Africa Community Federation's engagement. And by 1996, Shack Dwellers International was founded, which presently has 33 country federations of the poor, urban poor as members. She chairs its board of trustees and will speak more about this since it's part of the journey that she wants to share with us today. So without further ado, Jim, may we invite you to give your 10-minute talk. I'll give you a little prompt as we go forwards so that you don't overrun.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, so I have a more than 30-year history as a social entrepreneur, though I have to admit for more than the first 10 years, I didn't know I was a social entrepreneur. That wasn't a label. I thought I was the one weird guy in Silicon Valley not trying to become a billionaire and being quite successful at not becoming a billionaire, by the way. But starting in about 2000, I started to learn that there were social entrepreneurs. Jed Emerson, who worked with homeless people in San Francisco, investing in social enterprises, first explained to me about this. And very quickly, I started to meet other social entrepreneurs. And this was a big moment in my career, was to find out that there were other people like me, that there were people who could talk about social mission and a P&L, profit and loss statement, and their head didn't explode. And you know, when I was in the regular business community, starting regular for-profit companies, there were all of these gatherings, right? When I was a chief financial officer, there were all the meetings of the chief financial officers. And if there were, you know, then there'd be once you were president, you know, there'd be the Young Presidents Association or something like that. But in the nonprofit sector, I hadn't found anyone who was like me until I started meeting social entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I remember very well is like, within a year or two of getting involved with the Schwab community, I think Andrea organized a conversation on succession. And I frankly had not been thinking about succession at that moment, but it was the beginning of almost, I'd say, well, let's say about 18 years of conversations about succession that ranged from me being not even thinking about it, but realizing maybe I should, to botching it once or twice, to finally actually pulling it off in 2018. And so the value I've gotten out of these conversations is hearing the stories of people who had a successful transition, people who had a failed transition, the different approaches that people took to it. So in my case, soon after meeting this, I tried to bring in a number two person, someone who might be my successor, and I undercut him by not really giving him any responsibility. And so, you know, he spent about a year, and then he got tired and he went off and started another social enterprise in an area that mattered to him. And I went, that didn't go very well. And then in 2007. So 2007, we won a giant contract. So we had like $1 million a year social enterprise, and it won a $32 million contract from the National Federal Department of Education. And so it went from $1 million a year to $7 million a year in 1 year. And it became very clear that the person who was running that social enterprise for me wasn't up for the job of running a much bigger one. And so I brought in somebody, and having had sort of heard some of these failure stories, rather than bringing someone who is more of a chief operating officer, which is a very traditional model, I brought in someone who looked more like me. She was an electrical engineer like me. She had been an entrepreneur. She looked more like a general manager, more like a CEO. And over about a 10-year period, you know, she ran that social enterprise, did it very well. And starting about 5 or 6 years ago, she helped basically reorganize Benetech, and she was promoted to be president. So it was already pretty clear to me at that time that, having led the organization for about 25 years, it was time to actively start thinking about succession. And so when she moved into the president's job, pretty much everybody on the team reported to her except for basically operations, and I was in charge still of fundraising. And then over the last few years of that time period, she took on more and more of this agenda. And in the last 2 years, I started actively handing off funder relationships. I started speaking a lot less publicly, so that basically that she'd become the voice of the organization. And having been the head of our largest social enterprise, she was already closely associated with that. And she did a couple of major new initiatives that were associated with her that she'd come up with, and I was supportive of, but I was not the intellectual author of it. And of course, I thought this was going to happen a little faster because I thought that my exit strategy was to take a political appointment in the Hillary Clinton administration. But there wasn't a Hillary Clinton administration, very unfortunately. And so I was like, okay, well, that thing didn't work out. So I started thinking about, well, what are some of the other models that I had seen? And probably my favorite model was the person who left their organization and stepped into a field building kind of role. And in our community, that brings to mind people like Jordan Casselow, who had gone from running Vision Spring to organizing iAlliance. And the idea was, instead of relentlessly beating the drum for your organization, which is the job of most social entrepreneurs, right? You're the chief fundraiser and the chief promoter of your organization, especially as the founder. To move up to this, this bigger sort of field building role. Of course, bigger in some ways, lesser in other ways, right? Because in the field building role, it's much more about what the field does. It's less about what you do. Wendy Kopp and I, took a walk. She'd gone from running Teach for America for Teach for All, which is sort of, an expansion. So that was kind of my model. And so about a year before the transition, I told the board that I really was planning on moving on. And I engaged them around sort of, what the succession plan should be. Because I had a well-developed heir apparent that I had been sort of grooming for the position, I think the board was kind of relieved to not actually have to do a big search. And so in November 2018, stepped down, and I went into basically a 1-year quiet period. So in our bylaws, I have like a board appointment, for life kind of thing. But I didn't attend board meetings for almost all the first year until they kind of insisted I come back for a meeting. I didn't publicly say very much about what I was doing, and I went into this model of starting to work on field building activities. And this is something that you can do under U.S. charity law. I started a project under the Benetech umbrella. It's called physical sponsorship. So the idea was I didn't have to start a completely new organization. I had a new brand called Tech Matters, but legally we were just sort of an arm of Benetech. But it's a more independent arm, as in if I don't raise any money, I don't get paid. And so two of us started that arm, and
you've got about 3 minutes to go.
Okay, and so the idea was, focus on field building, mainly advising fellow social entrepreneurs. I'd always been the geek advisor to a lot of social entrepreneurs, and we're advising funders, because I also played that role, policymakers, and what actually ended up happening to me, which was kind of a surprise, was that 2 leading social entrepreneurs came to me and kind of shook me and said, Jim, you have to start a new social enterprise in the field that I care about. And the first of those was Drew Billamoria, who's kind of a famous serial social entrepreneur. And Drew said, you need to build a new tech platform for the child helpline movement. So basically, even though I'd said I was going to step into a field building role, which I still spend time on, I now spend 80% of my time either building this social enterprise for the child helpline movement, or another social entrepreneur in the climate change movement said I had to build a tech platform for the climate change movement. So, but I didn't get around to actually announcing Tech Matters until almost 18 months had gone by. And now after, a kind of, a year and a half, starting to actually talk publicly about what I'm doing. The transition to my successor has gone pretty well. It's still a challenge, I think, to replace me as chief fundraiser. But I think programmatically and the management team, everyone looks to Betsy, my successor. And the identity crisis that I think is, a lot of the issue, I kind of got reassured. I mean, I wasn't sure that I would actually be able to find any money or continue to work after I stepped down from Benetech. But it was kind of reassuring to find out that people still wanted my help, that funders still would talk to me. And now my new social enterprise has raised about $3 million, and we're up to 11 people. And it looks like what I'm back to doing is being a serial social entrepreneur. And I'm having a blast. So that's basically my journey through this transition of, being Mr. Benetech to being more and more in the background. And now I'm, assuming my new identity as the head of Tech Matters, still the founder of Benetech, but really focusing on what I'm doing now.
Fantastic. And what a well-timed talk. That was absolutely great. I know that is the smallest part of this, but of course, when you're the chair, it's the bit you worry about most. So it's really good to have you come in on time, and thank you very much. I see that there are already questions being put in to the Zoom chat. So after we have heard from Sheela, we'll take up some of those questions. And if you have further questions or comments, do please put them into the Zoom chat, and then we'll go from there. Thank you so much, Jim. That was a really lovely talk, and so wonderful to hear about the way in which you have dealt with the ups and downs of moving from Benetech onwards. Sheela, most welcome. It's lovely to have you with us, and we really look forward to hearing your talk. Do please start now, and I'll let you know when you have some 3 minutes to go.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Pleasure.
I don't know whether Jim remembers, but I think we came to the Schwab Foundation to get almost around the same time.
That would be my memory.
Anyway, so Chris, you've already sort of mentioned the major milestones in my life. So really my journey began as a accidental non-activist type of person who started working in community centers in 1984, worked for 10 years in one organization which did community welfare work, got very pissed off with the system, tried to take the municipality to court, only to be told by my Protestant institution, which has to be careful in India because it's a minority institution, telling me, don't cross swords with the municipality. You have to be in their good books. And how dare you take them to court without our permission? We are the board of the organization. And they made me take that case out in my personal capacity. So I started doing this work when I was 21. And then by the time I was 31, I was really, really politicized by the pavement dweller, the women on the pavement dwellers, the migrants. And they taught me so much, but they also made me really radical in terms of how, how facetious charity and welfare is. We tell poor women who are already burdened with everything, you have to do this, you have to do that. Then we do research which says, oh, if you give loans to poor women, they repay it. If you teach women, then they don't produce enough children. So they used to get pissed off when I told them all these things. So we decided that we needed to let go of this silly organization which was obsessed with welfare and charity, and look at ways by which we explore how to become serious partners. And that's how we started Spark. And that's when my colleague Jokin, who now is dead 2 years, started our relationship. He was a slum dweller who had fought for many, many years against eviction and started a network of really angry slum dwellers who were fighting evictions. And they came to work with me saying, you look like a different sort of person who's an activist, and maybe you seriously be our partner and not use us to raise funds and dump projects on us. And you must remember that at that time in general development, cities and poor people living in cities were not the focus of development. You know, all over the global south, there was a general paradigm, which unfortunately is still there today, that if you sort out rural development, you won't have all these poor people coming and messing your cities. Well, we've seriously messed it up, because now the world is urban. Although still everybody still thinks they're going to sort things out, even in this COVID period, by people going back to the villages. So anyway, to cut a long story short, the second organization that I was a part of and founded was Spark. And I'm still associated with it. But around the time that I was 62, I'm 68 now, I had a grandchild. And my daughter lived somewhere else. So I said I'd take a year off to spend with her and look after her baby. And my board and my organization said, do what you always do, which is abdicate everything that other people can do and just do the things that we think only you can do. And you can do them in this world sitting anywhere. And so that's how my journey of not being involved in administration and day-to-day work and focusing on doing all the fundraising alone stopped. And a whole team from my organization took that over. But that journey had actually begun many years ago, as you said, when the work that Jochen and I did, which we call the federation model, which is creating networks and federations of communities in cities, building their capacity to collect data, to manage solutions, and to negotiate with municipalities to transform cities and their own lives, which we call the federation model, and which was working in 9 states and 70 cities even then, was taken up by many countries in Asia through the Asian Coalition of Housing Rights, which I was a member of in 1988. And then in 1992, we were all invited to South Africa. And from that, this model just started getting adopted by more and more people who were earlier fighting for the rights of people in courts. And what our work, Jochen and my work, basically did was to say that the courts upheld a form of land rights that will never provide rights to poor people to have secure tenure in cities, because all our cities were organized by our colonists to produce land ownership that worked for the economy and stuff like that. So a lot of the people in the global south have lost their right to common land, to property. And so a lot of our work has been to organize large numbers of people to demand the right to the city. And that requires you to do a lot of political work, but not just in the form of agitations, but in forms of advocacy that starts locally and goes globally. So in many ways, I think we were ahead of our times, because what Jochen did was, he said, you NGOs don't have the right to make our representation globally. And so that was the time when my personal philosophy of abdicating 50% of my job every year started in Spark itself, so that more and more work got taken over by the community networks. They designed data collection, they produced data about what was not being available to them. People like us who were professionals, we identified the frameworks, and then the community networks did the studies that demonstrated nothing was coming to them. And then our ability to challenge municipalities and our national governments then produced new ways of partnerships and development happening. And a lot of this happened because we had a global voice. I spent more time with my finance minister in Davos and at the World Bank meetings than I could get at his office. So those were very important things. And so as I stand here today,
3 minutes
yeah,
to go,
yeah.
Sheela.
So as I stand here today, I find that the world has become almost undemocratic. All our governments and all our heads of organizations have appropriated more and more authoritarianism. There is deeper and deeper antagonism against the rights and entitlements of people for dissent. Courts are not working properly. So the crisis of many of the founders in the global south have been to protect the space that they have created for their networks. So although many of us are not part of the day-to-day administrations, we're not sticking to our space. And so just like Jim said that he transitioned to do other things, while I have transitioned very seriously into looking at urban poverty and climate in a very big way as a commissioner of this global local commission on adaptation, what we find is that all of us who are now in our 60s have had to network seriously to support and assist all the institutions that we have created, because their space is being eroded. So the role that we've had in creating and giving life to a new form, we now have to protect. So in Hindi, we have a word called Chhatra Chaya. That means you provide shade and support to what you have created. And that's the role we have today. It's not managing organizations. It's not holding on to what you started, but protecting the identities that you have created. So in many ways, when you gave this title to this thing, that you are the organization that you've created, those processes have produced movements that we have to protect, both locally and globally. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Sheela. Chhatra Chaya, very nice, very useful word to remember.
Yes, thank you.
I'm sure that we will remember it. Thank you. Thank you for a lovely talk and for pointing out the importance of protecting the global domain that you have yourself and amongst others created. So that's really wonderful. Now, Mel, do you spot some questions that we should be asking? Have you spotted some as we go along?
Yes, a number of questions, and it's very interesting to compare and contrast India from the US and some different nuances there. Fundamentally, the same issue. It's about us as people, as individuals, and how do we react. So I think there's a very good question in the chat zone there from Kurt, who's asking, just to get some examples of what was the context that made the transition possible, what happened. And I think it's a very good question, because one can talk about the general principles around this, but actually getting to know, because this is a new space for us, exactly what were the moments and what allowed you to make the transition, were there other people around, what was your personal circumstances, etc., etc. So perhaps maybe Jim and then Sheela could answer that question, because I think it kind of gets into the nitty gritty of the discussion today.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
Come in, Jim. Yeah.
So I think, Sheela talked about handing off more and more of her job and kind of doing this, what am I magic at? And what am I just doing that someone else could do? I think there is this generational transition. So how do we encourage the next generation to come on and take on the responsibilities and see what their potential is? So to be able to do that inside an organization, at least in our organization, took money. So we went to a more top-heavy structure. My job turned into 3 jobs. A CEO job that used to do all these things, and I now had a president and a chief operating officer. So what did that mean? That meant our overhead went from 16% to 21 or 22%, which is high for a lot of donors out there. But So in other words, we decided to invest in that. And so I think the idea of, what does it take? If you're going to actively develop a successor and have a second or even a third senior person, that means you're spending more money on that infrastructure. And part of my succession, when I turned over the CEO job to our president, our COO retired within 6 months, and now it doesn't have as top-heavy a structure, because I think we have a CEO who's willing and able to do more of that job. So I think that's one element of it. I think well, I'll just pause there. I think that for us, if we hadn't had the money, and in this case weren't willing to divert some of our existing funding to investing in a succession sort of plan that was more expensive in the form of more overhead, we wouldn't have been able to do it the way that we did it. We would have had to look outside for a successor and maybe take greater risks.
Thank you, Jim. Why don't you come in, Sheela?
Okay, I like some of the words that Jim has used. In our case, the replacement was very simple. First of all, we are burdened with philanthropists and donors who want us to not spend more than 8 to 9% on our administration. So we have to operate on a very lean basis. So we've always been very lean. And what we've done is to push more and more of the routinized activities to the federations to manage. So we only do the things that they can't do. So that allows us to be extremely lean, and therefore our ability to take risks and to do crazy things is possible. That was the main reason why we could do that. The second thing is that we operate, because of the fact that our work is political, we operate in a mentorship and investment state that is very different from a much more managerial style. So nobody is in charge of one job. Everybody is anchoring one thing and supporting 3 things. So you're always there as a group, and communities and all of us work together on that. And then finally, I think the most interesting experience we have is that leaders have to do something exciting to give up the space that they have, including me. And I think the fact that I had to move from just working in Bombay to working in 9 states, representing, and then moving from just working in India to working in so many other spaces. And so as of last year, I used to chair the board of SDI. I've now given up that role also. I don't have any formal position in SDI anymore. So, but my role is to work with 5 sets of committees that I used to personally work on, and create groups of people from different organizations who will do that. And now bring all of them into the climate space. So my plate is still very full. And I think another very important difference between our generation and the earlier generation, who were my role models, is I think at 68, I feel I'm the new 50. I don't feel an old person. But the imagery of a 68-year-old in another time was that you are an old person. And I think I don't feel like an old person. And I am ready to give the next 10 years to do something even crazier. So I think that'll keep me alive.
Well, at 71, I'm certainly with you on that one. I don't even mind being your younger brother.
Good.
So,
you're adopted.
There you are. There you are. There you are, Mel.
Yeah. Some interesting questions coming up. I think maybe, Sheela, you should know we're all in the same boat. We're all a bit crazy.
Yeah.
I'm getting younger all the time.
That's why I joined you guys.
And getting younger all the time. But I think it's a very good question here, really. What's the minimal time that was required to adequately hand over the full management of the previous organization to someone else? So did you both find there's a kind of time scale here? Can this be done in a month? Does it take a year? Does it matter? Are there other factors? So it's a very good question. If somebody's planning to do the succession, how long should they kind of approximately start to set aside for that to happen?
Yeah. So who would like to jump in on that? Jim or Sheela? It doesn't matter really.
Let's stay it like that. Then it's easier to let Jim start and then I'll follow.
So I think I think that every organization's different. Every situation is kind of different, right? So, I mean, my transition was planned over multiple years, and that's sort of one thing. It doesn't take multiple years. I think a lot of us have also seen transitions that happened. I remember, I think Jordan said that he decided to step down like over a weekend, right? Like driving to and from a board meeting with his successor. He kind of went, "Hey, why don't you just do it?" And then they had a board meeting, and it was done. So I think that some of these things, or maybe it was another one of the social entrepreneurs. I'm right now on a board, and I think this is another part of the role of being the senior statesman is, I don't think of myself as running these social enterprises anymore, right? Even though I'm helping get them started, the idea that I would run them is not part of the plan. The idea is that there are people with more energy and more dedication, and I want to work on 4 things at once. But one of the things I did is I joined the board of Callisto, which is for sexual violence survivors, and within a year the founder quit. And so, and part of the reason she quit is she'd been in the job for 10 years. She kind of burned out, and there was no successor, but she just quit. And so now we're in the middle of a search. We hired an interim CEO whose job it was to keep the organization going. And we're using a headhunter, which I had always sworn not to do, but I can see why a headhunter is actually quite helpful. So there are these examples from multiple years to a couple of days, and I think it's the job of the board to work with the CEO if there's a smooth transition, or simply to take over the responsibility, maybe have an interim if there's a more abrupt transition.
Yeah, thank you for that. Incidentally, Kat has written she loves the idea of only doing the magic, which I kind of sympathize with. Absolutely. Sheela, what is your take on that question?
Yeah, so I think that that one of the most amazing insight that I've got in all these things is that one of the biggest challenges for a lot of founders is this thing about burnout, which Jim talked about. That a lot of people who sort of behave like Atlas, do everything, take all the responsibility, like that. I have many friends who have messed up their personal lives, destroyed their health, and are completely shattered by the time they have to leave because they've just burnt all their boats. They don't have relationships. It's not a joyous journey. So I think one of the first things that I would talk to young people is have a balanced life. The world, if it has to crash, is going to crash even if you do the most wonderful thing. So don't destroy yourself. And the other thing is that you can plan till kingdom come. You can do everything, and then you would still have CEOs who come for a little while and leave. So a lot of things have to happen, and you have to deal with them as they happen. And some organizations do these journeys graciously and beautifully, and others go through tremendous turmoils. So a lot of it is also to do with external environments. Like in India, I think 2 or 3 generations of superb people who worked with me quit because they manage, in India and all over the world now, you have consulting firms that have developed development wings. And they end up paying 5 to 10 times more than what grassroots organizations can pay. So we've lost several generations of younger, talented people who were delighted to work with us. But when you are married, you have a couple of children, and you get offered a brilliant job, you have to take it because your economic circumstances require it. So there are all these kind of things that you have to sort of deal with and manage. But I think one of the biggest problems that boards have is they want to replace the founder with a cookie cutter person. We want somebody just like you. And you'll never find a just like you. And so boards also have to evolve to be strategic about what they do. And finally, the other problem I think we all have is that we are trying to copy the corporate environment too much. NGOs are being pressured to develop very strong management systems. So if you're an organization like ours, which is doing a lot of political work and stuff like that, those systems don't sit with you. And what I'm seeing, a lot of my own colleagues who were amazing organizations becoming subcontractors to large philanthropies, who are now the vision, they own the vision and you are subcontracted to do it. So you're also seeing a lot of changes in the sector, which worry me a lot.
Cool.
I don't know if that's part of this conversation or not.
It may be part of another one, but it's definitely all part of the same conversation in the end. Mel, let's come back to you.
Yeah, Francesco had a question. Jim touched on it there, which is, should you look for your successor inside the organization or go outside the organization? Now, I guess there's no strict answer to that one way or the other. It would be very interesting to get Sheela and Jim's insight to that, because you can see the pluses and minuses on each. I guess for me, connected to that is this whole bit of the head and the heart. So your head will be telling you one thing as a social entrepreneur, the logical thing, but your heart is telling you something else. And what's the one to follow? And I think from my side, I always find that conflicts and is quite difficult. So maybe maybe you could answer that question as well, Jim and Sheela. Headhunter or internal, head or heart?
Well, I think let me go to that last part, because one of the things when Sheela was talking about the people who'd burned all their bridges, I mean, it may seem funny, but I went into the nonprofit sector and stuck with it because it was less killer than being the CEO of a startup for-profit tech company under the thumb of the venture capitalists, which is what I did for the first 10 years of my career. And the thing that was probably one of the most things personally helpful to me was the Well-Being Project. And, my organization had never invested in me in 25 years, right? We just never did anything like that. And then I think Sally Osberg told me to get involved with a fellowship program here in Silicon Valley area. I got a lot out of that. And then I did the Well-Being Project, which was really big. And I think that it also helped with this, being a calmer, nicer person who is going to help me let go. So I wanted to bring that up. I think I touched on the headhunter thing a little bit, because right now I'm going through the headhunter experience for the first time for the Callisto CEO job, and finding it worked. I never used recruiters because I always felt that the mission focus was so important, and the recruiters were not very good at finding people who are really focused on mission. Especially, it's not 7 times, but it's a third. When people leave their tech companies to come work for us, they often cut their salary by half or 2/3. And so it's been a somewhat different experience. And then the last thing I'd like to weave in is and let's be honest, being the second CEO, the successor to a founder, is one of the toughest jobs possible in the nonprofit sector, right? And it's often, the founder is so successful, the second CEO lasts a year, and then it's the third CEO that then, because everyone has gotten over their love affair with the founder, the second CEO never had a chance, took all the bad hits, and now the third CEO actually goes on to success. And that was one of the things I was trying to prevent, was my successor, flaming out within a year. And so she's made it for like 20 months now, and so I'm like, yay, maybe, I'm hopeful, but certainly doing everything I can.
That's great, Jim. Thank you. Sheela.
I can only talk personally in terms of the organizations I work with. This issue of the head and the heart are very important, because most of our job is to facilitate transformative changes amongst community people to become the main voices. So you need somebody who's not obsessed only with efficiency and management, but has the capacity to facilitate, mentor, abdicate, share. So a lot of our processes require this sort of continuity. In my case, one of the things that happened accidentally, but that worked for me, is that because I did a lot of work for STI, until I think even now, until the COVID thing started, I'm in Bombay only 10 days of the month. I travel most of the time. So it required more and more in my organization for people to be independent, to manage things differently, and to only reach out to me when they needed my help. And interestingly, they didn't have any problems with the outside. The problem was when they had problems with each other inside. So my role was to bang their heads and say, no, let's do something together, which was easy because we have very good relationships with each other. But I think that the headhunting thing has not generally worked very well in our sector, because most of the headhunting organizations specialize in bringing people in for corporate, professional businesses. And their knowledge and their understanding of what is needed for this sector, at least for the kind of movement building organizations, is very difficult. So that is a challenge. And some of the boards on which I am, which are much more organizationally professional than my own organization, we've had many situations where they found even senior people, but they don't want to go into informal settlements. They don't want to travel to villages. So there's a very strange, most of them have very strange experiences with headhunting. Haven't worked with us much, at least not in Asia and Africa where we work.
Sure. Thank you, Sheela. I think what we'll do, Mel, is we'll invite our colleague Andrea to begin her summing up of the conversation to date, so that we don't rush at the end. And then if we have any time for a last question right after Andrea's finished, then we'll come to it. Otherwise, we'll close at that point. Is that okay, Mel?
Yes, yeah, absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine.
Great.
Yeah, there might be a couple of minutes at the end.
Absolutely. But Andrea, over to you. Give us some of your thoughts and the summary that you'd like to make.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, it's this. I'm really thrilled with what Jim and Sheela have brought to this, because I think we all of us feel, as Sheela has said, that the corporate sector really doesn't help or reflect the journey that we as social entrepreneurs and building social enterprises should take. And I think that what Jim said right at the beginning of what he said is, when we all first meet other social entrepreneurs, because we don't know we're social entrepreneurs, these are people like us. And I think when Chris, Mel and I started this small organization, we wanted it to do this because these are people like us, and we have a unique journey. Social entrepreneurs have a unique journey and unique challenges that don't have really, we can't learn very much from other sectors. But just thinking about Kurt's question about the context, one of the for a transition, and that raised the issue of money, and it's one of the things that so many of us really face. How does the organization prepare for succession? That part of that has got to be looking at how you raise the money to do that, and how you make sure that if there is a board, that the board is behind you. Sheela said that she was in a privileged position because the board was behind her, and we think that is a critical aspect. And where do you find new people? So certainly in my case, I know that we have to develop the strength and the capacity of the people in our organization who are in Africa, and that's not going to be found in a recruitment agency. So those are the aspects that are very important. And how do you make sure that an individual doesn't burn out and gets the support? And we know now from initiatives like the Wellbeing Programme, where social entrepreneur founders are being supported, is making a huge difference to how you approach your own moving on, and how the organization approaches its own movement forward. And I think one of the things that Sheela said that stands out for me is that a social entrepreneur, to be able to move on at all, really needs something exciting to go to, and something meaningful, something important for us to do. I think very few of us are going to retire and put our feet up and never think about the world again. We're all people who want to make change. And I can't see any of us doing that, sort of sitting back and saying, oh, well, that's it, over for me. But I think we need support in that. We need support in the boards. We need preparation, both practical, emotional, and physical, really. So I think that this has been an incredibly useful conversation. And I'd like to add that as this is a small and early stage organization, that all your contributions about what you'd like to contribute, what you'd like to hear from us, and how you'd like to benefit from the Elders Council for Social Entrepreneurs, we'd like to hear from you. We have another session in October, which Clementine will send out about. That's called, the title of that is When I'm 64. That's much more about the practical steps, the board, the money, how do you prepare practically for succession. And then also we're planning a workshop where, if an individual would like a more as it were intimate or less public discussion about a specific issue that we could all discuss together, we'd love to hear from you if you'd email us, and we'll arrange that workshop with a very small group of us, and we'll let you know a date via the very kind and supportive offices of Clementine at Ashoka.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Yes, When I'm 64, the famous Beatles song, do you remember? So, of course, it's what Sheela said, actually. 64 used to be considered quite old. So when the Beatles wrote that song, When I'm 64 was considered to be like getting old, you know? And now, of course, it's really quite young. But that is on the 26th of October. And I see that Clementine has sent out the link on the chat. So that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much for doing that. We're coming to the end of the session, and I just wanted to do a couple of thank yous. First of all, to Pavitra, who is on here. She's part of the Schwab WEF group, who has been very supportive of us. Thank you, Pavitra. And for you, Clementine, thank you so much for your help in managing and running this program so efficiently. We really appreciate that very much indeed. Because we may feel young, but still it's nice to have that support, and it's really helpful. Jim and Sheela, thank you for bringing your wisdom to this group and for sharing it so generously today. We feel that one of the reasons that it was good to bring this group of people together, this organization together, is to share knowledge and wisdom in a generous way, and to do so without fuss and without too much bother. And I think you have achieved that absolutely perfectly today. You really met us absolutely head on, and we've thoroughly enjoyed everything that you have shared with us and everything that you have said to us. We are very grateful to everybody for coming. This session has been recorded, and we will make that available to you so that you will be able to review it later if you would like to.